I'm not supposed to be telling you this. Hell, I signed papers that said I'd never breathe a word about what happened beneath the Arctic shelf. But I need to get it out before the memory rots my brain completely. Maybe you'll think I'm insane. Maybe you'll laugh. But if you keep listening, I promise, by the end, you'll wish you hadn't. I was a submarine technician aboard the USS Leviathan, a nuclear fast attack boat with more steel and secrecy welded into her than most countries could afford. My job was simple: keep the guts alive. Power systems, pressure valves, pumps, the things nobody cares about until they fail. It wasn't glamorous, but down there, a stuck valve can kill you faster than a bullet. We'd been under for just over a week when I noticed it. The first crack in the routine. And trust me, on a submarine, routine is everything. You live by cycles: eat, work, sleep, repeat, until days blur into weeks. There's comfort in the monotony, but that morning, the comfort was gone. I woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. It wasn't strange to hear someone else in the bunk room. It's rows of metal coffins stacked 3 high, always occupied. But this was different. It was too close, wet almost, like someone leaning over me, dragging air in through water. I jolted up, hitting my head on the bunk above. Nobody was there. The red nightlight bathed everything in its usual dim glow. I checked the others, snoring, twitching, one guy murmuring in his sleep. Normal. But that sound, I know I heard it. I told myself it was nothing. The mind plays tricks when you're short on sleep, especially with recycled air and no windows. Still, I couldn't shake it. Every time I blinked that day, I saw a shadow bent over me, inhaling my air. Have you ever felt someone watching you, even when you know you're alone? That's what it was like. A presence that clung. The next anomaly came during a drill. We were running an emergency ballast blow, simulating an ascent. I was in the engine room, checking readings, when Chief Garvey barked at me to hold steady. His voice was rough, but what caught me was his face. His lips moved a half-second slower than his words, like a bad dub in an old movie. I stared too long. He snapped, "Problem tech." I shook my head and buried myself in the gauges. But the delay stuck in my mind. Flesh and voice out of sync. You ever hear something that makes no sense, then convince yourself you imagined it just to keep going? That's what I did. But the cracks widened. That evening, in the mess, the cook served stew. Or that's what it was supposed to be. Everyone shoveled it down, but the smell was off. Not spoiled, not metallic like bad cans, but sweet, like rotting fruit. I pushed it around my tray. "Eat," Garvey said from across the table. His spoon hovered over his bowl, dripping, untouched. His eyes fixed on me. "I'm not hungry." He smiled without showing teeth. "Eat anyway." And here's the part I can't explain. The part you'll doubt immediately. When I glanced down, the stew wasn't stew. For a second, just a second, I saw writhing things in it. Pale, finger-like shapes twisting under the surface. I blinked, and it was just beef chunks again. But Garvey was still smiling, still not eating. Do you see the pattern yet? The others, my crew, my brothers, they were changing. Or maybe I was. That's the hook that digs into me. Was I watching them become something else? Or was the submarine twisting me into madness? That night, lying in my rack, I decided I'd test it. I'd wait for that breathing again, prove to myself it wasn't real. So I lay awake, staring at the metal above me. timing my breaths, forcing my chest to rise and fall slowly. Minutes bled away, and then, faint as a ripple in dark water, it started. Inhale, long, wet, almost gurgling. Exhale, rattled, wrong. I held my breath, thinking maybe it was one of the guys snoring. But the sound didn't change. It kept pace, just above my head, like something kneeling on the bunk above me, dragging lungs it shouldn't have. I couldn't move. Every muscle screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The submarine is a steel coffin, remember. Now imagine hearing something breathe inside that coffin with you. Something that isn't supposed to exist. Finally, I snapped. I slammed my hand against the bunk above, hard enough to rattle it. The sound stopped, just gone. My bunkmate above shifted and cursed in his sleep, but that wasn't the sound I'd heard. His breath was shallow, normal, human. I stayed awake until morning, eyes burning, ears straining. Nothing else came, but by then, the damage was done. Because I knew something for certain, even if I couldn't admit it to the others, I wasn't alone down there. Not anymore. And the worst part, whatever it was, it wanted me awake. The strange part about living in a submarine is how quickly paranoia seeps through the steel walls. There's nowhere to escape your thoughts, no horizon to trick your brain into believing in space. Just metal, wires, and recycled air pressing in on you hour after hour. After that night, every sound felt like a test. The groan of the hull, the hiss of pipes, the squeal of hydraulics. Each one I dissected, desperate to prove to myself that what I'd heard was mechanical, not something else. But the crew was different. It wasn't obvious, not at first. Subtle things, a delay when they answered, a stiffness in their smiles, a quiet undercurrent I couldn't put into words. I'd known these men for months, drilled with them, sweated beside them. They were familiar, predictable. And now, it was like someone had swapped them out for actors who didn't study the roles well enough. On the third day after the breathing, I was in the control room with Lieutenant Harris. Normally, he was all sharp edges, fast talker, eyes always scanning. But that day, he sat motionless in his chair, staring at the sonar screen. His pupils didn't track the green sweep. They didn't move at all. "You good, sir?" I asked, my voice too loud in the humming room. No response. I stepped closer, tapping the console like maybe he was just lost in thought. His lips twitched. A whisper escaped, too faint to catch. I bent down, leaning in until my ear almost touched his mouth. That's when I heard it. Not words, not English, not anything I recognized. Just a sound. A series of clicks and burgles, like air bubbles forced through a throat not meant to speak. And his skin, God, I swear his skin rippled, as if something underneath was adjusting itself, settling. I backed away so fast, I hit the periscope stand. The clang jolted him. He blinked, smiled thinly, and said, "Steady seas today," like nothing had happened. Have you ever tried to carry on a conversation after you've just caught someone muttering in a voice that isn't theirs? I couldn't even answer. My mouth went dry. I left the control room under the excuse of needing to check the valves. Harris didn't stop me. He just kept smiling. That night in the mess, more things unraveled. The room was buzzing with the usual chatter, trays clattering, silverware scraping. But when I sat down, the whole table went quiet. Every single head turned toward me. Not subtly, Just a synchronized swivel. 10 sets of eyes, blank and heavy, fixed on me like I was prey that had wandered into the wrong nest. I forced myself to lift my fork. The stew again. Always the stew. I lifted a spoonful to my mouth, but before I could taste it, I glanced sideways. Chief Garvey was still watching me. His spoon was hovering above the bowl, dripping, untouched, same as the other night. I set my spoon down. The silence grew. The air felt damp, thick. I swear I could hear the beating of their hearts. Or maybe that was mine, thudding against my ribs. Finally, someone laughed. Not a normal laugh, but a sharp, barked sound that cut through the tension. The others followed, too loud, too sudden. The room filled with false noise, like actors improvising after forgetting their lines. I stood and left my tray untouched. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even looked anymore. They just went back to shoveling that sweet-smelling stew into their mouths, one after another, like machines being fed fuel. I spent that night hiding in the engine room, pretending to check gauges long after my shift ended. I couldn't face the bunk room, not with that breathing waiting for me. But exhaustion always wins. Around 0300, I slumped against the bulkhead and drifted into a half-sleep. That's when I heard it again. Not the breathing this time. Worse, a scraping. Slow, deliberate. Metal on metal. Coming from inside the wall, inches from my skull. I pressed my ear against the panel, holding my breath. It wasn't machinery. I know the ship's heartbeat, every hiss and clunk. This was something foreign, something with intent. And then, 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced, from the other side of the steel. I stumbled back, my legs trembling. No one could be in there. That space was sealed, packed with wires and pipes. Nobody fit. Nobody alive. The knocks came again, louder. I covered my ears and slid down to the deck, shaking. I wanted to scream, to run to someone, anyone, but who? The crew? The ones who stared too long? Who smiled without eating? They weren't mine anymore. By the time morning came, the knocking had stopped, but the dent in the wall remained. Small, shallow, as if something inside had tested its strength. And I knew then, with a clarity that hollowed me out, the steel wasn't going to hold forever. The dent haunted me. Every time I passed that panel, I caught myself glancing at it, half expecting to see it bulge outward, half terrified that it might be gone, as if it had never been there at all. But it was there, cold to the touch, smooth around the edges. Evidence that something had reached out. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? Hey, Chief, the submarine walls are knocking back at me. That would have landed me in medical for observation. And down here, that's as good as solitary. Still, the secret gnawed at me, a splinter under the skin. I started studying the crew, more than my own work. The shifts, the routines, who lingered in the mess, who avoided sleep. And that's when I noticed something else. They weren't getting tired. At least, not the way they should. Submariners live exhausted. That's the rule. Dim lighting, recycled oxygen, endless drills, it wears you down. But Garvey, Harris, even some of the junior guys, they looked alert. Too alert. Their eyes wide, movements sharp. While I staggered through the days with sand in my veins, they walked like predators, patient and awake. It came to a head during a drill in the forward torpedo room. I was checking a hydraulic line when I heard whispering. Not the normal chatter of sailors killing time. This was hushed, deliberate, like a conversation not meant for me. I edged closer, crouching behind a rack of tools. 2 men stood by the tubes, axe to me. I recognized one by his posture, Ensign Dyer. The other I couldn't place. Their voices were low, wet-sounding, not right. "Not ready yet," one said. "Hunger grows," the other answered. I leaned in. My heart hammered so loud I thought they'd hear. "Soon. The skin must learn." The words chilled me deeper than the Arctic water above us. The skin must learn. What the hell did that mean? A wrench slipped from my pocket, clanging against the deck. Both men snapped their heads around in perfect unison. Not like startled humans, like animals catching a scent. Their eyes locked on mine. "Something wrong, Tech?" Dyer asked, his tone casual, but his smile stretched too wide. I stammered, grabbed the wrench, muttered about a leak check, and bolted. Their laughter followed me, echoing down the corridor, low, gurgling, a noise no throat should make. That night, I couldn't avoid the bunk room any longer. My body begged for rest. I climbed into my rack, pulling the thin blanket tight around me, forcing myself to believe the others were asleep, normal, human, but I couldn't shake the whispers. Even with my eyes closed, I swore I heard them. From the bunks, from the vents, from the steel itself. Wet, clicking syllables rolling together like water over rocks. Around 200, I opened my eyes and froze. Across from me, in the dim red glow, Harris sat upright in his bunk. Not lying down, not resting, sitting perfectly still, staring straight at me. His chest didn't rise or fall. No breath. Just eyes gleaming in the dark, unblinking. I yanked the blanket over my face like a child, heart slamming against my ribs. Ridiculous, but I couldn't stop myself. I stayed like that until the morning whistle, suffocating under the heat, too afraid to lower the fabric even an inch. When the lights came on, Harris was lying down again, snoring softly, like nothing had happened. I wanted to confront someone, to scream. But when I opened my mouth in the mess, surrounded by their blank faces, all I could say was, "How's the coffee today?" Like a coward. Later, while repairing a coolant pump, I felt it again. The presence. Heavy, pressing, just behind me. I turned, wrench raised like a weapon. Nothing. Just the shadows of the engine room. The endless tangle of pipes. And then, another knock. This time from the deck beneath my boots. 1, 2, 3. I crouched, pressing my palm to the steel. The vibration thudded into my bones. Something alive was moving inside the skin of the submarine. Something that knew I was listening. When I staggered back, I saw it. Not a dent this time, but a hairline crack along the floor plate. Thin, jagged, as if something sharp had scraped from the inside. I stared at it until my vision blurred. And for the first time since we submerged, I wished for the impossible. I wished the ocean would crush us flat and end it cleanly. Because whatever was inside this submarine, inside my crew, it was still learning. And I had no idea what would happen when it finished. Sleep became impossible. My body demanded it. But every time I shut my eyes, the whispers crawled into my ears. Sometimes they were too faint to make out, just a murmur under the hum of the ship. Other times, they were sharp and deliberate, syllables that scraped like broken glass. I started hearing my name in them. Not Tech, not Miller, just the drag of my first name stretched too long, bubbling through unseen lips. By the 5th day, my hands shook constantly. Tools slipped. Gauges blurred. I was slipping. I knew it. But I also knew I wasn't alone in this slipping. The crew looked solid on the surface. But if you watched closely, if you timed your gaze just right, you caught it. A twitch in the jaw, a flicker under the skin, eyes that didn't blink when they should. And the smell. The submarine had its own stink always, a mix of grease, sweat, metal, and recycled air. But now there was something sweeter lacing through it, sickly, like syrup poured over rot. It followed the crew like a perfume. I could taste it when they walked past. I tried talking to someone outside the circle. Petty Officer Lane, young, nervous, the type who still counted days until surfacing. I caught him alone in the galley, chewing a protein bar, looking half dead from fatigue. "You smell it, don't you?" I whispered. He blinked. "Smell what?" "That sweetness, like fruit gone bad." His expression changed, a shutter closing. His shoulders stiffened, and for a moment his eyes rolled up too. Far, whites swallowing the pupils. Then, just as quickly, he smiled. "You need sleep, Tech. You're cracking." And just like that, I lost him. Lane wasn't Lane anymore. The isolation dug claws into me. I found myself talking to the walls, muttering as I traced the crack in the engine room with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, but sometimes it pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. It was during one of those moments, when I was crouched, low and whispering to the steel, that I saw something move. Not a shadow, not a trick of light. Through the thin, jagged split, a sliver of pale flesh pressed outward, testing the gap. Slick, seamless, no pores, no hair, just skin that didn't belong to any man. I staggered back, wrench clattering to the deck. The flesh withdrew instantly, sliding away into darkness, leaving the crack yawning wider. For the next 2 days, I avoided the engine room altogether. I found excuses, switched duties with anyone who'd let me, but deep down, I knew it was pointless. The thing wasn't confined to the walls. It was in the crew. The proof came during a midnight drill. We were ordered to muster in the forward compartments, packed shoulder to shoulder. The air was damp with sweat and stale oxygen. I tried to focus on procedure, but my eyes betrayed me. They locked on Harris again. His mouth was moving, not in sync with the drill, not forming words, moving on its own, stretching wide and wider, until the corners of his lips cracked faintly in the dim light. Inside, his teeth looked wrong. Too many, too sharp. And beneath the shifting lips, a bubbling whisper spilled out, drowning the captain's commands. No one else reacted. No one even blinked. When the drill ended, Harris walked past me. His eyes snagged mine. He didn't speak, not in English, but I swear he mouthed something. Just one word. Soon. After that, I stopped trying to fit in. I avoided meals. I avoided bunks. I prowled the narrow corridors like a rat, clutching my wrench like it could ward off whatever they were becoming. I pressed my ear to the steel sometimes, listening to the knocking. It was changing, faster now, almost rhythmic, like a language I couldn't translate. And then came the moment that shattered any hope of denial. I was in the aft corridor, checking a valve, when I heard a scream. Short, cut off too quickly. I sprinted toward it, boots thundering on steel. When I reached the junction, I froze. Lane, the same kid I thought might still be himself. He was pressed against the bulkhead, his mouth open in a silent scream. Garvey stood in front of him, one hand on his shoulder, just holding him there. But Lane's chest was collapsing, sinking in, like the air was being pulled out of him. His ribs buckled inward, his skin folding like wet paper. I choked back a shout. Garvey turned slightly, his eyes meeting mine across the corridor. His face was calm, almost kind. And then, just like that, Lane was gone. Not gone in the sense of dead, gone as in gone. His uniform crumpled empty onto the deck, nothing left inside it. Garvey's hand lingered in the air a moment longer, flexing as though savoring the last trace. Then he picked up the empty uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it by the wall. When he straightened, his smile was waiting for me. I ran. I didn't stop until I collapsed against the aft hatch, lungs burning, bile rising in my throat. My wrench clattered from my hand, useless. Lane was gone, vanished like he'd never existed. And the others hadn't made a sound about it. That was the moment I knew survival wasn't about duty anymore. It wasn't about following orders or patching leaks. It was about outlasting whatever had taken my crew. I stopped marking the days after Lane disappeared. What was the point? The submarine no longer felt like it was counting time in hours and shifts. It was breathing in its own rhythm, holding us inside its lungs, waiting for something. I barely spoke. I ate only when I had to. Tiny scraps of bread I pocketed to avoid the stew. My weight dropped, my face hollowed. The others noticed. I could feel their stares, hungry, patient, measuring. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. One night, I forced myself to the mess anyway. My stomach gnawed at itself, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could fake normalcy long enough to avoid suspicion. The room was quiet when I entered. Too quiet for the dozen men inside. Forks moved, jaws chewed, but no words were exchanged. Only the wet sound of swallowing. I slid into an empty seat. A bowl was waiting for me. Not served, not requested, just waiting, as though they'd known I would come. The stew glistened in the dim light, sweet smelling, too thick. I lifted the spoon. My hand shook. Garvey leaned forward across the table, his eyes locked on mine. "Eat," he whispered. Not loud enough for anyone else, but sharp enough that it pierced through the silence. The others didn't even glance up. I dipped the spoon, raised it, hesitated, and that's when I saw it again. The surface broke, not with chunks of beef, but with something pale, writhing, thin as fingers, curling upward before sinking back into the broth. My stomach lurched. I dropped the spoon. The clang echoed through the mess like a gunshot. Garvey's smile widened, and the others all looked up at once, dozens of eyes fixing on me. Not angry, not surprised. Just waiting. I stumbled back from the table, muttering something about a valve check. No one stopped me. No one spoke. They all turned back to their bowls in perfect unison, scooping, chewing, swallowing. Back in the passageway, I pressed my fist to my mouth to keep from screaming. My heart hammered so violently I thought it would crack my ribs. I knew then the food wasn't food, at least not anymore. But the worst came later, in the silence of the bunk room. I lay in my rack, body trembling, trying to keep my eyes closed. The breathing hadn't returned for 2 nights, and I prayed it was gone. But instead, something else arrived. A hand. Cold. Heavy. Pressing against my chest through the blanket. Not squeezing. Just testing. My eyes snapped open. Above me, in the bunk, Harris was peering down, his face upside down over the edge. His mouth stretched wider than any jaw should allow, lips trembling as though barely containing something behind them. His breath smelled like the stew, syrupy and rotten. I thrashed, shoving at the hand, but there was no strength in me. The pressure stayed, steady and patient, until I thought my ribs would cave. "Harris," whispered then, not in English, not even in that clicking language I'd heard before. This was deeper, a guttural bubbling sound that slid straight into my skull, and I understood just one word in it: hollow. When I finally screamed, the pressure lifted. Harris was gone, lying in his rack like he'd never moved, breathing softly, eyes closed. My chest burned where the hand had pressed, as if the cold had seeped through my skin. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, during inspection, I tried to look normal. My hands twitched as I checked gauges, and I caught Garvey watching me from the corner of his eye. Always watching. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed proof, something I could hold, something that would make this nightmare solid. So I crept back to the engine room, to the crack. It had widened. A jagged split, no thicker than my finger, running deeper now, down along the seam of the deck. The metal edges glistened with moisture. I crouched low, pressed my ear against it. At first, only silence. Then, movement. A slick sliding sound, like muscles shifting in the dark. And then, from deep inside the hull, a voice. Clear this time. My voice. "Help me," it whispered. I reeled back so hard, I smacked against the bulkhead. My own voice echoed in my skull. It hadn't been memory. It hadn't been imagination. Something inside the walls was wearing me, mimicking me, calling to me in my own tongue. That was when I realized the truth. The submarine wasn't just a coffin. It was a womb, and something inside it was learning to be us. I staggered away, wrench clutched in my hand, sweat soaking my back. And for the first time since we submerged, I wasn't afraid of drowning anymore. I was afraid of surfacing. I started counting the faces. Every time I passed through a corridor or the mess, I tracked them one by one, burning their features into my brain. It wasn't about familiarity anymore. It was about noticing who was missing. Lane was gone, but no one spoke his name again. And I swear, each day the crew shrank, just slightly, yet the submarine still felt crowded. At night, I heard them whispering in the bunk room. Not words, not English, but the same guttural clicking, wet and throaty, like gills opening and closing. Sometimes it sounded like laughter. Sometimes it sounded like prayer. I stopped sleeping in the bunks. Instead, I wedged myself into a storage compartment, curled among crates of spare parts. The air was stale, but it felt safer in there, as if the walls might hold the whispers out. On the third night, I woke to the sound of scraping against the door. Slow, testing. Something dragged its nails, if they were nails, down the steel, pausing just long enough for me to imagine the shape behind it. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks. Always 3. I pressed both hands to my ears, rocking back and forth, praying it would stop. After a long minute, silence returned. But in the morning, when I slid the door open, the metal bore 3 fresh dents, as though something had tapped from the inside. I didn't go to the mess that day. My body begged for food, but I couldn't risk it. Instead, I prowled the aft sections, searching for proof. Something I could take back with me, if I ever got back. That's when I found the hatch. It was tucked behind machinery. A maintenance crawl space sealed since before deployment. Rust kissed the bolts, but fresh moisture clung around the edges. The smell wafting from it was unbearable. Sweet, syrupy rot, the same stench that clung to the crew. My hand shook as I unfastened the bolts. The hatch groaned open, and a wave of warm, damp air spilled over me. Inside, the crawl space was pulsing. Not metaphorically, literally. The walls glistened with a thin membrane, slick and fleshy, stretching and contracting like lungs. Tubes of meat ran along the pipes, pulsating faintly with something dark inside. The submarine wasn't steel in there anymore. It was alive. I gagged, stumbled back, slammed the hatch shut. But the smell clung to me, seeped into my clothes, into my skin. I staggered to the head, splashed water on my face, trying to scrub it away. When I looked up, Garvey was standing in the doorway. "You've been exploring," he said softly. I froze, water dripping down my chin. His eyes were wrong again, too wide, the whites veined with faint silver lines. "I was just checking." "No need to explain," he interrupted. His lips barely moved, as though the voice was coming from somewhere else entirely. "It wants you to see." I backed away, reaching blindly for the wrench I'd left on the sink. My fingers found cold steel, and I raised it between us. Garvey didn't flinch. He just tilted his head, studying me like an insect in a jar. Then he smiled, slow and deliberate. "You'll make a fine skin." I bolted past him, shoving through the narrow corridor, wrench clutched so tight my knuckles bled. I didn't stop running until I reached the bow, chest heaving, every nerve on fire. That night, I didn't hide in storage. I didn't dare close myself in. Instead, I crept to the control room while the others slept. Or pretended to sleep. I needed answers, charts, logs, anything that explained what we were doing down here. The captain's desk was neat, too neat. Papers stacked, logbook open. I flipped through the pages. At first, it was normal. Coordinates, sonar readings, patrol routes. Then the writing changed. The entries weren't in English anymore. Not even letters. Just rows of symbols, curved lines, spirals, dots that resembled eyes. The ink shimmered faintly, as though wet. I turned the page, and my stomach dropped. There was a drawing. The submarine, but not as steel, as flesh. Tentacles of sinew spreading from the hull, roots digging into the ocean floor, mouths along the keel. My hands trembled so hard, the book almost slipped. And then I heard it, the low, bubbling whisper from behind me. I spun. The crew was there, not one or two, all of them. Standing in the control room doorway, blocking my escape, their eyes gleamed in the dim red light. Their mouths moved, whispering in unison, clicking and gurgling in a language that felt older than the ocean itself. Garvey stepped forward, smile fixed. "It's almost ready," he said. "The skin is nearly learned." They advanced as one, filling the room, cornering me against the captain's desk. I raised the wrench like it was a sword, knowing it was useless. The whispers rose around me, echoing off the steel, seeping into my ears, my bones, my mind. And for the first time, I understood them. Not words, not exactly, but intent. They weren't just becoming something else. They wanted me to become it too. I don't remember how I slipped past them. My mind has blurred it into flashes. Red light, a wrench swinging, the stink of brine, hands reaching for me that didn't feel like hands anymore. One moment I was cornered. The next I was crawling, bruised and bleeding, through the aft corridor like a rat. Something had changed in me after hearing their whispers. I shouldn't have understood, but I did. And worse, I felt the pull of it, like a tide in my skull, tugging me back toward them, urging me to surrender. I forced myself into the torpedo bay. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and for a second I thought I'd lost them. I slumped against the bulkhead, breath ragged, ears ringing. That's when I saw Lane. He wasn't missing. He wasn't gone. He was hanging. His body was suspended upside down from the ceiling, wrapped in tendrils of that same fleshy membrane I'd seen in the crawl space. His eyes bulged, mouth open, but no sound came. His skin was stretched taut, veined with something, black and moving underneath. I staggered forward, hand over my mouth. His chest rose once, barely, and his lips twitched like he was trying to speak. "Lane?" My voice cracked. His jaw dropped wider than it should have, bones bending with a wet pop, and a thick stream of seawater spilled out. His voice came with it, gurgling through the flood. "It's already inside!" I stumbled back, slipping in the spreading water, wrench clanging. From my hand, that's when the others arrived. Their silhouettes filled the doorway, blocking the red glow of the corridor. Not running, not rushing, just drifting forward, shoulders rolling, as if they were moving underwater. I scrambled to my feet, pressing against the wall, searching for a weapon. Anything. My hand landed on the manual crank for the torpedo hatch. The cold steel handle. They didn't stop coming. Garvey at the front, his smile wider than ever, his teeth too sharp in the dim light. "You don't have to fight," he whispered. "You'll breathe with us, see with us, live with us. Isn't that better than rotting alone?" Behind him, the crew whispered together, the clicks and gurgles swelling until the bulkheads vibrated. I swear I could feel it in my ribs, shaking me from the inside out. My body wanted to obey, to step forward, to let them take me. But some small part of me, a stubborn, terrified shard, clung to life. I grabbed the crank, spun it. Metal shrieked as the torpedo hatch began to open. The sudden rush of pressure howled through the bay. Papers tore from the walls. Tools clattered across the deck. Seawater roared in, icy and black, slamming against my legs. The crew staggered, caught off guard, but they didn't drown. They welcomed it, their mouths opened wide, sucking in the water like air, eyes rolling back in ecstasy. I screamed, throwing myself toward the emergency ladder. My hands slipped, skin tearing against the metal rungs, but I climbed. Higher, higher. The water rose beneath me, filling the bay, swallowing Lane, swallowing everything. At the top of the ladder, I slammed the hatch shut, sealing it. My lungs burned, my muscles shook, and still I heard them beneath me. Not choking, not drowning, singing. The sound carried through the steel, low and guttural, a hymn from the bottom of the ocean. I collapsed in the corridor, coughing salt water, eyes burning. My mind spun with one thought. There was no escape. The submarine was theirs. The crew was theirs. And now, the water was rising, carrying their voices closer. I needed to reach the radio. If I couldn't escape, I could at least warn someone. Anyone. The control room was dark when I staggered inside. The hum of the instruments had changed. Deeper, slower, like a heartbeat. The red emergency light pulsed with it, sinking to the rhythm, painting the walls in a grotesque glow. I rushed to the comms panel, slammed the switches, twisted knobs. Static hissed, a faint crackle. My hands shook too violently to keep steady. "This is Technician Mark Halloway, USS Caspian." My voice came out hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "If anyone hears this, the crew is gone. They're not human. The ship is changing. Don't come for us. Sink us. For God's sake, sink us before it." The radio cut out. Not static, just silence. Then a voice, not from the speaker, from behind me. "It already heard you." I turned. The captain was standing in the shadows, his uniform immaculate, his cap tilted perfectly. His face was pale, lips bloodless, and his eyes were black, entirely black. He stepped forward, boots echoing. "You've seen too much," he said. "But maybe you'll see everything. Maybe you'll understand." I stumbled back, hand groping blindly for the wrench I dropped earlier. But there was nothing, just cold steel, humming like a living thing. The captain's smile widened. His jaw unhinged, stretching far too low, and something wet and glistening began to unfurl from his throat. It wasn't human anymore. It never had been, and it was coming straight for me. I froze. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, but terror pinned me in place. The thing that wore the captain's skin kept unfolding, its jaw stretching farther than bone should allow. Tendons snapping wetly as something writhed up from inside. It wasn't a tongue. It wasn't anything from off. It was a slick coil, pale and glistening, covered in ridges that pulsed like veins. The end split open into a ring of teeth that clicked against each other in a rhythm, like the whispers, but louder, closer. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the console. The radio crashed to the floor, shattering into useless pieces. My only hope for outside help, gone. The captain, or what wore him, lurched forward, that coil stretching toward me. The room smelled of rot and seawater, a stench so thick it made my stomach spasm. My back hit the wall. Nowhere left to go. "If you were me," I whispered, voice trembling, "would you have opened that hatch?" The coil lunged. Instinct saved me. My hand landed on the emergency flare gun, mounted near the console. I didn't think. I didn't aim. I just yanked it free, jammed it upward, and fired. The flare exploded inside his open mouth, searing white fire erupting down his throat. The thing shrieked. Not human, not animal, just raw, bubbling rage. The black eyes burst like blisters, spraying burning ichor across the steel. I shoved past him as he convulsed, the coil whipping wildly, gouging into the ceiling. The control room filled with smoke and the stench of burning flesh. My ears rang, my lungs choked, but I kept running. The submarine groaned around me. Not the usual metallic creak. This was different. Organic, wet, as if the very hull was crying out in pain. I sprinted through the corridors, every step echoing against walls that no longer felt like metal. They were warm, pliable. When I brushed one with my hand, it gave slightly, like skin stretched over muscle. The whispers rose again, surrounding me. Louder this time! Angrier! The crew wasn't far. They were hunting. I made for the engine room. If I couldn't escape, I could end it. I could sink this hell before it reached the surface. The hatch groaned as I forced it open. Inside, the heart of the sub no longer resembled machinery. The reactor housing pulsed like an organ, black veins crawling across its surface. Tubes of flesh connected it to the bulkheads, pumping some viscous fluid. Through the walls, and at its center, cocooned in that glistening membrane, was Garvey. His body half merged with the machine, skin stretched taut, veins glowing faintly blue. His eyes snapped open when I entered. "You can't stop it," he gurgled, voice bubbling with fluid. "It was always meant to grow. You're just another layer of skin." I raised the flare gun again, but it was empty. Just a useless chunk of steel. My hands shook as I searched for anything else, anything I could use. The emergency manual override, the failsafe, a last resort meant to flood the reactor and scuttle the ship. I stumbled toward it, slamming my hands onto the lever. It was stuck, slick with some foul secretion. Garvey laughed, or maybe it was the reactor itself. With a guttural roar, I threw my weight against it. The lever jerked, resisted, then finally wrenched down, with a sound like bone snapping. The submarine screamed. Not the hull, not the reactor, the whole thing. A deep, resonant wail that shook the corridors, rattled my teeth, and drove nails of pain into my skull. Water surged in. Bulkheads ruptured. Flesh split. The sub was dying. If it could even die. I ran up the ladder, through rising water, lungs burning. Behind me, the whispers became shrieks, furious and unending. I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached the forward hatch, the water was chest-high, slamming me against the walls. My fingers clawed at the wheel, wrenching it with everything I had left. The hatch blew open. Black ocean rushed in, swallowing me whole. I don't remember how long I drifted. Minutes, hours. I was just a speck, tossed in the freezing dark. The wreck of the Caspian sank below me, its screams muffled into silence. When I woke, I was on a trawler. Fishermen found me, floating miles off course, barely alive. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me water, asked what happened. I couldn't tell them. I can't tell anyone, not really, because if I speak the truth, if I describe what's still down there, someone will go looking. But the nightmares don't let me rest. I hear the whispers in the pipes of my apartment, in the hum of my refrigerator, in the crash of waves against the shore. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I smell it again, that sweet, syrupy rot seeping out of my own skin. I don't know if I escaped, or if I brought it back with me. What I do know is this: if you ever hear knocking beneath the ocean floor, don't listen, don't open, don't answer, because once it learns your skin, it never forgets.